You've seen the photo. Guy in a quarter zip, aviators pushed up on his head, one hand on the railing of the air stairs, caption says something like, grateful, and for about half a second, a number pops into your head. 2 million? 5? 10? You do the little mental math everybody does, you decide it's probably out of reach, and you scroll. I did that exact thing for about 8 years. Then I actually got to sit in a room with the invoices, and I found out that almost every number I'd been guessing was wrong. Not a little wrong. Wrong in a direction that would have genuinely surprised me. Here's the thing nobody tells you about private jets. The purchase price is the least interesting number in the entire deal. It's not the cost, it's the entry fee. It's the cover charge at a bar where the drinks are what actually get you. I'm 35. I've spent 12 years on the finance side of closely held businesses, not Fortune 500 stuff. Regional distributors, construction outfits, dental groups, a guy who owns 41 self-storage facilities. And when those businesses cross a certain revenue line, the same conversation happens every single time. Somebody brings up the jet, and it always starts in the wrong place, which is the sticker price. So let me tell you about Danny. Danny Reyes owns car washes in the Phoenix Metro. Started with one location in 2011 that he bought with an SBA loan and a cosign from his mother-in-law, which he still brings up at Thanksgiving. By 2022, he had 11 locations and a very good year. And Danny called me in February and said, in the specific tone of a man who has already decided, I found a plane. It was a 2004 Hawker 800 XP. Mid-sized jet, 8 seats, transcontinental-ish range if the winds behave. Asking price was $1.85 million. And Danny said the line that I have now heard maybe 30 times in my career, word for word. He said, that's less than my house. And he was right. It was less than his house. That was also completely irrelevant, and I want to explain why. Because the reason is genuinely one of the more interesting pieces of asset math I know. Your house doesn't have two salaried professionals whose entire job is your house. Your house doesn't need a heated storage facility that costs more per month than most people's mortgages. Your house doesn't require federally mandated inspections where a technician bills $200 an hour to take it apart and put it back together. And your house doesn't drink. Start with the drinking, because that's the number people underestimate most. A mid-sized jet burns 200 to 250 gallons an hour. A Gulfstream or a Global, 350 to 450. Jet A, at a nice private terminal, runs $6 to $9 a gallon, depending on the airport and how much they hate you, so run it. 300 gallons an hour, at $7 is $2,100 an hour just in gas. 4 hours round trip to Chicago, and you've burned $8,400 of fuel before anybody's been paid, before you've parked, before you've eaten a single one of those little pretzel things. And here's the part that stings. That's the cheap line item. The first time I actually flew private, I was 30. A client took me to a meeting in Chicago, and I got to see the whole thing from the inside. You pull up to a private terminal, they call it an FBO, and you drive your car basically onto the ramp. No line, no shoes off. There's a lounge with a fireplace and a woman named Diane who remembered my client's coffee order and asked about his daughter's volleyball season. There were warm chocolate chip cookies, actual warm cookies sitting in a little basket, and I remember thinking, this is the most seductive customer experience I have ever encountered in my life. 2 weeks later, I saw the invoice for that trip because I was doing his books. Round trip, Teterboro to Chicago Executive. About 6 hours of flight time total, including the repositioning. $38,000. $38,000 for cookies and a meeting. And I want to be honest with you about my reaction, because I think the honest reaction is more useful than the smart one. My first thought wasn't, that's outrageous. My first thought was, how much would I have to make for that to feel normal? That's the question the entire industry is built on. That is the whole business model. Not the airplane, the question. Okay, so where does $38,000 actually go? Let's take the machine apart. Every private jet has 2 cost buckets, and they behave completely differently. Fixed costs happen whether you fly or not. Variable costs happen only when the wheels leave the ground. And almost everyone who buys a jet underestimates the first bucket by a factor of about 3. Fixed costs start with people. You need pilots, not 1, 2, for basically any jet worth owning. And the pilot market has gone absolutely sideways in the last 5 years. My college roommate Marcus flew regional out of Cincinnati. In 2014, he was making about $52,000 a year and eating a lot of gas station food in Bismarck. Marcus now flies a Challenger for a family office in Connecticut, north of $180,000 plus per diem, plus a hotel budget, plus they cover his training. And Marcus is not the expensive one. Captains on large cabin aircraft are clearing well over $200,000 and getting recruited constantly. When I tell owners this, the reaction is always the same little pause, and then, wait, 2 pilots? 2 pilots. Every year, whether you fly 100 hours or 10. Then, the airplane needs somewhere to live. Hangar space runs from $2,500 a month in a quiet market to well over $10,000 at the airports people actually want. Teterboro, Van Nuys, Scottsdale, in season. And you can't just leave it outside, not if you care about the paint, the avionics, or your insurance premium, which is another $15,000 to $100,000 a year, depending on hull value and your pilot's experience. Underwriters care enormously about who's in the left seat. Then, recurrent training. Every pilot goes back to a simulator center once or twice a year, $15,000 to $30,000 per pilot, annually, forever. There's the management company, another few thousand a month. Navigation databases, charts, satellite weather, registration and property tax in some states, which people always forget until the bill shows up. Add all that up on Danny's Hawker before it ever flies anywhere, and you are somewhere around $600,000 a year. Airplane parked, in a building, doing absolutely nothing. Danny's face when I showed him that spreadsheet is a thing I will remember for a while. Now here's the line item that actually ends people, and it's the one almost nobody outside aviation knows about. Engine reserves. Jet engines don't fail gracefully, and they don't get repaired casually. They get overhauled on a schedule, and an overhaul on a mid-sized jet can run several $100,000 per engine. So the industry invented programs. You'll hear names like JSSI or corporate care, where you pay a fixed amount per flight hour and the program covers the big events. Call it $400 to $900 an hour depending on the aircraft. That's per hour, on top of fuel, on top of everything else. So now let's actually build the number. Danny's Hawker, flying 200 hours a year, which is roughly what an average business jet does. Fixed costs, $600,000. Fuel, call it $400,000. Engine and maintenance reserves, another $250,000. Landing fees, ramp fees, catering, crew hotels, de-icing in the winter, which by the way can be $4,000 for a single application on a cold morning in Chicago. Call the whole thing $1.4 million a year. He bought the plane for $1.85. He will spend roughly the purchase price of the aircraft every 16 months just to keep it in the air. And we haven't talked about depreciation yet. I want to introduce you to Ray. Ray Vandermeer is an aircraft broker in Scottsdale, been doing it since the 90s, has the specific leathery tan of a man who spends a lot of time standing on ramps in Arizona. Ray taught me more about this asset class in one afternoon than I'd learned in 5 years of reading about it. And the first thing he said was, every listing photo is taken at golden hour, and every airplane has a story the seller doesn't want to tell. Ray's advice is that you spend $50,000 to $150,000 on a pre-buy inspection before you close, which sounds insane until you understand what he's protecting you from. A jet that's been sitting is worse than a jet that's been flying. Seals dry out, corrosion starts, and there's a whole category of aircraft in the used market that guys in the business call hangar queens. Beautiful. Low hours, nightmares. Ray watched a buyer skip the pre-buy in 2021 because the market was hot and he was scared of losing the deal. 3 months after closing, the plane came out of its next inspection with a bill for $840,000 in corrosion and structural work. Ray's line about it was, he saved 90 grand on the inspection. He says it very slowly. And then depreciation. A new jet can lose a serious chunk of its value in the first few years, and a 20-year-old airframe often trades for a small fraction of what it costs new. There was a strange window in 2021 and 2022 where used jet prices actually went up because everybody suddenly wanted out of airline terminals and there was no inventory. A lot of people mistook that for a rule. It was a spike. The curve went back to being a curve. So, if the economics are this brutal, why does anyone do it? Two reasons. One is real, one is a tax code. Let's do the tax code first, because it's the reason the math flips for some people and the reason other people end up with an IRS problem. Under U.S. tax law, an aircraft used predominantly for business can be depreciated. And for a good stretch of the last several years, bonus depreciation has let buyers write off a very large percentage of the purchase price in year one. That provision phased down for a while and then got restored to full strength in the 2025 legislation. I'm not your tax advisor, and the details matter enormously, so talk to somebody who does this for a living. But the concept is what drives the behavior. If you're facing a large tax bill and you can accelerate a huge deduction against it, the after-tax cost of the airplane looks radically different than the sticker price. That is why aircraft brokers get very busy in the fourth quarter, every single year. It is not a coincidence. But here's the trap, and this is where I want to tell you about Priya. Priya Raman was a CFO at a company I consulted for. Manufacturing, family-owned, second generation. They bought a jet in December, took a very large deduction, and everyone felt extremely clever. The problem is that the deduction depends on qualified business use, and the IRS has a specific and fairly unforgiving view of what counts. Personal entertainment flights aren't deductible at all. Personal non-entertainment travel creates imputed income for the passenger, calculated with a formula the industry calls SIFL, and business use has to stay above a threshold year after year, or the depreciation you already took comes back at you through recapture. Their pilots kept flight logs, because pilots always keep flight logs. Those logs listed passengers, and a lot of those passengers were the owner's adult kids flying to a vacation house in Colorado in February. The IRS announced in early 2024 that it was ramping up examinations specifically on corporate aircraft personal use. Priya spent the better part of a year on that. She told me the worst part wasn't the money. It was that every conversation with the family for 8 months was about an airplane. So, the tax angle is real. It's also a knife with no handle. Which brings me to the second reason. And this is the one that actually justifies the whole thing when it's justified at all. There are roughly 5,000 airports in the United States a private jet can use. There are about 500 with scheduled commercial service. That gap is the entire product. You're not buying luxury. You're buying access to a country that the airlines don't fly to. I worked with an orthopedic group in Nashville that wanted a jet. 6 surgeons, reasonable sounding case, they wanted to cover satellite clinics across 3 states. We ran it, and a jet was completely wrong for them. Their trips were too short. On a 200-mile leg, a jet spends most of its time climbing and descending, and you barely get to use the speed you paid for. So they bought a King Air 350 instead. Twin turboprop, slower, less glamorous, burns a fraction of the fuel, lands on short runways at small fields a jet would have to think hard about. One of the surgeons told me he was slightly embarrassed by it at first. Propellers. Then he told me it gave him back about a full day a week, and he stopped caring what it looked like. That's the actual product, not the cabin, the day. Now, let's talk about the alternatives, because whole ownership is the last rung on a ladder, and most people should stop climbing before they get there. Bottom rung, you just charter. Call a broker, book a plane, pay by the trip, no fixed costs at all. Under about 50 hours a year, this is almost always the right answer, and it isn't close. Next rung, a jet card. You put down a deposit, usually somewhere between $150,000 and $350,000, and draw against it at a locked hourly rate with guaranteed availability. You're paying a premium for certainty. Then fractional, NetJets, FlexJet, That world. You buy a share of a specific aircraft, pay a monthly management fee, and pay an occupied hourly rate when you fly. A 16th share gets you around 50 hours a year. You never actually see the airplane you technically own, which sounds absurd until you realize that's the whole benefit. Your plane's in maintenance? They send a different one. That's the entire pitch, and it's a good one. I had a client, Marissa, who ran a specialty insurance brokerage and was dead set on buying. She flew about 90 hours a year. We built a model with every scenario side by side, and fractional won by a wide margin, and she was annoyed about it for 2 weeks. Then she called me in October and said the thing that stuck with me. She said, I realized I didn't want an airplane. I wanted to not be at O'Hare. Whole ownership only pulls ahead somewhere north of 250 hours a year. Below that, you're paying $600,000 of fixed cost to fly an asset that's parked most of the time. Your average business jet flies maybe 300 hours a year. A commercial airliner flies 10 times that, and that's not a coincidence either. Airlines are in the business of utilization. Private aviation is in the business of availability. Those two things are economic opposites, and availability is expensive by definition. So let me tell you about the one guy I've worked with where the math actually, cleanly, unambiguously worked. Walt Kaminsky distributes industrial parts out of northern Ohio. Bearings, seals, hydraulic components, the stuff inside the machines that make the things you own. His customers are plants in places like Muncie and Kokomo and Wausau, airports with a runway and no commercial service to speak of. Walt flies 380 hours a year, and he takes engineers with him, 3 or 4 at a time, because his sales process involves standing on a factory floor looking at a broken machine. When we ran his numbers against the alternative, 4 people connecting through hubs and losing 2 days per trip, the jet won on cost, not on vibes, on cost. Walt does not post about it. I've never seen a photo of Walt on airstairs. He flies a 15-year-old mid-sized jet he bought carefully after a pre-buy Ray would have approved of, and he keeps it because it makes his company money. And that's the split. That's the whole thing. For a small number of operators, a private jet is a capital expenditure that generates a measurable return, and you can put it on a spreadsheet and defend it to your board. For everybody else, it's the most expensive way ever devised to feel a specific way about yourself. I'll give you my own honest ending on this. 2 years ago, I ran the numbers on a jet card for myself. Not a plane, just a card. I was traveling a lot, I was tired, and I built the model at 11 at night the way you do when you're trying to talk yourself into something. The model said no, clearly. I sat with it for a week anyway, because I knew what I was actually buying, and it wasn't transportation. It was the version of myself who takes that flight. That version is real, and the wanting is real, and pretending otherwise makes you worse at this, not better. I didn't do it. I fly commercial, decent seat, noise-canceling headphones, and I get where I'm going. But I understand Danny now, in a way I didn't at 30. He kept the Hawker, by the way. Sold it 2 years later, at a loss he described as educational. He said it was the best, worst decision he ever made, and then he laughed for a long time. Here's what I'd leave you with. Every asset you'll ever consider has 2 prices, the one on the tag and the one you pay every month for the rest of the time you own it. Cars, houses, boats, businesses, airplanes. The tag price is what people talk about. The carry cost is what actually determines whether you're free or whether you're working for the thing. Learn to see the second number. It will save you more money than any investment you ever make. If this was useful, subscribe, because I do this every week, and I break down the money behind things people only ever see the outside of. And drop a comment telling me what you want next. I've got a full teardown of the yacht chartering market ready to go, and honestly, the numbers on that one are so much worse than this. I'll see you in the next one.